If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, how is it possible for there to be so much pain and suffering in the world that we live in? And perhaps nothing exemplifies that pain and suffering more than disease caused by pathogens like viruses and bacteria. How could we think of God being good and still creating viruses and bacteria? Thankfully, we're joined today by Dr. A.J. Roberts, a virologist, a molecular biologist, and a Christian to help unpack this very difficult topic. In a previous episode, we talked about the idea in big picture terms that we could think about pathogens and viruses and bacteria maybe in a broader sense as part of the creation, as reflecting the consequences of the fall, and that we have an opportunity to take part in God's plan of redemption when we think about pathogens. So today I want to focus on just one of those areas, namely the idea of viruses and bacteria and God's creation. So how do we think about viruses in the context of creation, and could we think of viruses and bacteria as being good?
Yes, Fuzz, I think we actually can think of viruses as being good. And it took me a long time to be studying viruses before I actually came to that conclusion, because I started by studying human pathogens. But actually, viruses can infect pretty much every type of living cell that there is. And there's a wide diversity of virus types out there in nature. And what's fascinating is that there are on the order of 10 to the 31 particles of viruses that specifically infect bacteria in nature. And so if we think about those in particular, many of them actually look like little spaceships. So they're very odd looking things that you might encounter in nature. But they enter bacteria, and within 20 to 30 minutes, they can lyse or kill the bacteria and release 200 more virus particles like the one that originally infected the bacteria. And why do I think this might be a specific example of viruses as part of God's creation? Is because it helps control the bacteria population. If you think about bacteria, they're very efficient at mutating and taking up nutrients, and they reproduce very quickly. And since there are so many ecological niches where bacteria can thrive, we might actually be just an earth full of bacteria if it wasn't for bacteriophage. And not only that, but the bacteria and the bacteriophage, they make up a huge part of what's called the biosphere, or the biomass within the ocean. Some scientists say more than 90% of the biomass in the ocean is due to microbes and phage, which infect microbes. And why is that important? Because that part of the biosphere actually helps control the ability of other higher organisms to acquire nutrients and to live and to support life at higher levels. So if it wasn't for bacteria, and specifically bacteriophage keeping bacteria in check, our lives wouldn't be possible. The earth would probably be overrun by bacteria. Those nutrients wouldn't be available to us and to other animals. Bacteria contribute to nitrogen collection and oxygen production, the sequestration of iron and phosphorus from the environment. And so these kinds of things are produced and collected by the bacteria, and then the phage, through killing the bacteria, actually release it to the environment so other organisms can take advantage of it.
Now, in the previous episode, you mentioned this idea that viruses form symbiotic relationships with other organisms that you felt would be beneficial. Maybe unpack that a little bit for us.
That's true. So viruses, especially viruses in plants, have been discovered, and most of these that I'm getting ready to talk about, some of them have been known for a while, but many of the viruses that have symbiotic effects are just now being discovered because of our ability to do something called metagenomics, which is sequence a whole bunch of different types of nucleic acids from a particular sample. And so we're starting to discover viruses that don't have a pathological effect in their host. And if a virus has a pathological effect, it's easy to see that something is suffering from disease. And so we've been able to discover those viruses fairly early on. But viruses that have a positive effect or a symbiotic effect are just now being discovered in large numbers because of metagenomics. But some of these viruses actually allow plants to survive under harsher conditions, like times of drought or even times of cold weather. And so they can actually have a beneficial cycle or role in the survival of plants in nature. Another way of thinking of maybe viruses in creation, and I've got to be careful not to be misunderstood when I say this, but viruses can actually contribute to population control. I'm not talking about human population control, but I'm talking about more like what I just said about bacteria. Viruses are controlling the population of bacteria on Earth. We could also think of them as helping to control maybe some of the lower forms of life on Earth as well.